you referred to yourself as a critical lover of the United States. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think very simply, I want the United States to do very well. And as you know, through my wife, I have lots and lots of American relatives and lots of America. I've spent, I think, 15 or 16 years of my life in the United States. And my book, As China Won, is dedicated to my 92-year-old mother-in-law who lives in New Jersey. So I want a good life for my mother-in-law.
And how, in terms of U.S. perception of China, China perception of U.S., how do you think the other countries in Asia, in particular India, Japan, and in Australia, in terms of Asia Pacific, how are they viewing China right now?
Well, I think these are three very different countries with very different interests. As you know, they're all four members of the Quad. And by the way, I just did a very long session on the Quad with the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, which is set up by Koch and Soros, as you know. A good discussion, which is on the web now. Their interests are very different. And they have very, very different concerns. And the Japanese, for example, are the most worried about China. And they have to be, because unfortunately, they're the one neighbor of China that did the most damage to China during China's century of humiliation from 1842 to 1949. And the Japanese don't want to have a great historical reckoning. Okay, that would be very painful for Japan. But that is their concern. How do you deal with a very big China? Australia has got a different concern. But I think the only country that really gives half to the Quad is India. And in fact, without India, the Quad wouldn't be anything. And India, of course, Indian public opinion has become very, very negative on China, especially after the June 2020 incident where lots of Chinese and Indian soldiers died fighting each other, literally with fists and wooden clubs. But I don't, the one simple test of diplomacy is how many countries are applying to join the club, right? And as far as I know, I don't know of any country knocking on the doors of the Quad saying, let me in. So for example, I mean, the other major ally of United States in East Asia is South Korea. In fact, if South Korea joined the Quad, it would be called the Squad. Be a better name, I guess, than the Quad. But as far as I know, South Korea is not going to join. So so it's and the other thing that's awkward about the club is that everyone knows that it's an anti-China club, but they will all deny that it's an anti-China club.
But I want to go to Taiwan, because Taiwan is such an important part, in a way, of the China-Japan relationship, and of course the U.S.-China relationship. When the U.S. and Japan had their leaders meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Suga, it's the first time that the Taiwan Straits was mentioned in a meeting between the two leaders since 1969. How do you think Taiwan is going to impact the relationship between the U.S. and China, and between China and Japan?
Well, I'm glad you raised Taiwan, because by far the most dangerous issue in the U.S.-China relationship is not Xinjiang, it's not Hong Kong, it's not anything else, it's Taiwan. The only issue on which China may actually go to war is Taiwan. So let's be very, very clear that you're dealing with a very, very dangerous situation here. And of course, as you know, the United States had a policy of what is called strategic ambiguity. towards Taiwan, which I think was a very wise policy to have. But there was a moves that were made to have strategic clarity. I think strategic clarity would have created problems. Ambiguity would have, in some ways, allowed everyone to live with conflicting interpretations. And the one good thing that the Biden administration has done is that it has made a major U-turn on Trump's policies towards Taiwan without announcing it. But both sides understand the U-turn very well. And what is this U-turn? There was a very clear understanding that was worked out when the United States established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, I forget in what year, 1979, I think, Jimmy Carter's time. And the understanding was that the United States acknowledged that there's a one China policy advocated by then China, then Taiwan. And the United States would maintain official relations with the government of the People's Republic of China and unofficial relations with the administration in Taiwan. And that was a policy that carried on from 1979 till, I don't know when, 2017, 2018, when Trump suddenly began to change. And then Trump started to send officials, current officials. Now, that was a major shift in policy. Have you noticed what President Joe Biden has done? In the first 100 days, he sends 3 retired officials. Senator Chris Dodd, Richard Armitage, Jim Steinberg, all retired. And that was a very clear signal to China, okay, we're going back to the past. And that was, I think, a very positive development. And I think the Chinese noticed too, very clearly. And you notice that you mentioned the Suga Biden communique. Here, this is where sort of words are so important in diplomacy. The words used were Taiwan Straits, not Taiwan. And so the Japanese were not committing themselves in any way to the defense of Taiwan. They can't. They'd be in deep trouble. Because, you know, the way Taiwan, China believed it lost Taiwan first in the 1895 Sino-Japanese War. So it's a real hot issue in the Sino-Japanese relationship. The Japanese don't want to touch it too strongly. So when you talk of peace in the Taiwan Straits, it could be that the Taiwanese government is upsetting peace in the Taiwan Straits. It could be that Beijing, that's ambiguity there. So the ambiguity creates room for maneuver. So in diplomacy, ambiguity is actually a very good deal.
And what would you like to see Biden do and Xi Jinping to do going forward?
Well, I think unfortunately, the fact that the geopolitical contest has carried on. I mean, Trump when Biden came, the contest is still proceeding, right? And so it unfortunately confirms the main thesis of my book, as you know, is that this contest is driven by deep structural forces, not by personalities. So Trump goes, Biden comes in, the contest is carrying on. So you got to understand the larger geopolitical structural forces. And in terms of my advice to President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping, I would say at the end of the day, focus on only one thing: how to improve the well-being of your people. I mean, the well-being of your people is much more important than your primacy in the geopolitical sphere. Okay, and there's no point having being number one, having the number one defense budget in the world, either US or China, if the standard of living of your bottom 50% is going down. Focus on improving the standard of living of your people, and then find ways and means of working with each other. And at the end of the day, I would agree with what Henry Kissinger said in the podcast, that there has to just got to be coexistence between US and China. US cannot change China, China cannot change the USA, and now they got to learn to live with each other in a world where you have two powers which are so different, and so the histories are so different, and so both have to go through a great learning experience to understand each other. And that's what I hope my book does.